All right, well, we are live now this morning. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We have two incredibly intelligent people with us today, Mike and Anisha. Mike, please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are. We'll start with you, Anisha. This is your second time, so you go second.
All right, I'm first.
You're first, buddy.
All right. So my name is Mike Lukianoff. I've been in data analytics, mostly in restaurants and retail for about 20 years. I've been working in data since before the term data scientist or big data was coined. Back then we were just nerds. And
still are a nerd, but that's okay.
I worked a lot with menu optimization, price optimization, promotional forecasting, pretty much everything you can imagine doing with data. I used to have a company called Zarmetrics that I sold to Fishbowl. And I ran the data organization for Fishbowl for several years until leaving there about a year and a half ago.
Awesome. Anisha?
I am Anisha Hargrave. I am a product innovator and menu development specialist and consultant, and I help essentially brands develop products and menu categories and menus to meet their business development goals and brand development goals. So, done some pretty exciting things. I made salads for a living for a long time, and had a pretty cool opportunity to work with some really forward-thinking and big brands and rely on the data that folks like Mike generate to help us understand
All right, she froze up for a moment. So the fun of Zoom meetings, you get someone to freeze all of a sudden. There she's back. You froze for a second. All right.
I was afraid it was me. That's a relief.
Yeah. Oh, it's you. All right. Well, we were told earlier that we have to mention that the Dodgers, are fabulous because Andrew's a huge Dodgers fan. So do you want to expound on that, Andrew?
No, I think we don't need to spend much time on it other than to say that it was a great series and a great game. And games are clearly won both on the field and in the dugout, or potentially lost in the dugout. I think the manager froze or got scared and decided to pull his pitcher. And one of the things that's interesting and maybe possibly relevant to our conversation is not only the talking heads, but some of the players were really kind of spouting off and angry about data, cyber analytics, I think they're calling it, Mike, driving the game, and decisions about the game. And so that manager had access to information that said, third time through the lineup, this pitcher, who was by all accounts pitching brilliantly, third time through the lineup with Mookie Betts coming up to bat and one guy on first, he was going to fall apart. That's what the analytics told him. And so they put in a new pitcher, and guess what happened? In that inning, the Dodgers scored 2 runs, and then which put them ahead, and then a third run shortly thereafter. And so I don't know. I think that maybe we can segue away from baseball and back into restaurants, but we're just thinking about data and gut and how do you manage the two, or the art and the science, however you want to call it.
I think it's a good analogy, Andrew, because the book Moneyball was really the first time somebody was able to bring, statistics and probabilities into the mainstream and get attention, or maybe it was the movie because Brad Pitt was in it, right? But since that, more people, talk about probabilities and statistics and refer to it as Moneyball. But that's really what data and analytics is doing, and in restaurants, that's what I've been doing my whole career. Is you're using the data to try and use probabilities and try and set yourself up for success, right? How do you make sure that you're winning more often than you're losing, whether it's by right sizing the menu, whether it's by pricing the products correctly, whether it's by picking the right site to open a restaurant to begin with.
It's a bunch of different topics that you just put out there. Let's talk a little bit, Michael. You and I talked last week a little bit about a lot of things you've been hearing lately, and people as they're trying to deal with the current situation, what they are and aren't doing well. And it occurred to me at that point, there's probably your observations of what people are and not. And that Andrew and Anisha could probably add a lot of color to, how folks could be thinking about doing things differently to respond.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's so much that's just happened in the last, since last March, and some of it, just from a data standpoint, some of it contributes to the data that we have because suddenly the entire industry has gone digital. Mm-hmm. Some of it also completely disrupts all of the other trends. So, from a data perspective, if you're dealing with linear models and all that kind of thing that tries to project, what you're going to do tomorrow, all the trends that you had pre-COVID are completely disrupted. So it's nearly impossible to predict what's happening tomorrow based on the ways that you used to do it. That doesn't mean that it's impossible to understand it. There are new data sets, so you need to get creative. It just means that the way that you used to do it, isn't going to be the same way the way that you need to do it today isn't going to be the same way that you did it before. And I think that's true with the data and the analysis. It's also true with being a restaurateur, right? And being a retailer, because your trade areas have been disrupted. So, people have vacated their workplaces. They're now working remote. I saw some research the other day that said that nationally, 27% of offices are occupied. And this was measuring, actual security check-ins by badge check-ins in the top 10 markets. And that is really low. And the highest, I think, was Dallas at about 42% office occupancy. Now, even after COVID, the genie's out of the bottle and work from home. So how many people are really going to go back into the office 100% of the time, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week? It's not gonna happen that way. It's going to be very different. And retail shopping, in-person shopping, it doesn't go away 100%, but we've basically fast forwarded 10 years in 6 months to forcing people to all of a sudden, okay, now I shop online for 90% of what I have, or 90% of what I need. So this retail apocalypse of using malls and so forth has just, shot full speed ahead to something that we thought was going to take years to happen. And now it's on top of us. So the trade areas that were built around shopping and workplace dynamics, some of these are never going to come back, not the way that they used to. So you've got to think about, back to the fundamentals of restaurant marketing and, the site selection that, that originally got you to where you were. Are these, is this pad in front of a mall, right? Or whatever the site is it ever going to come back? Because, there's still people who have to eat and there's still demands, but what do they want? Because there's other trade areas that are horribly underserved that are very close to residential locations, right? So those areas that, maybe there's just a convenience store, right, and a Domino's pizza. And so there are, so those few delivery locations are all of a sudden overwhelmed, right? Or there's a full service restaurant, but they can't actually utilize their dining room. And a lot of municipalities have forced restaurants to do, to only have curbside because, maybe their dining room is completely shut, or maybe it's 50% or 20% or only outdoor. Or maybe they can have, 100% seating, but the consumer isn't ready to go and sit elbow to elbow, inside a dining room, right? So, I did some research with Fred LaFranc's group at Results Through Strategy on independent independent restaurants. And what was interesting was that almost 70% of the restaurants that we surveyed had said that they had instituted curbside. But out of those 70%, or actually out of all of the respondents, only 30% had modified their menu in any way. So these restaurants, including the full serve restaurants, were still serving their entire menu, but bringing it to curbside. And that is an impossible task, right? At least half of that menu is not suited for off premise. It's either going to be, terrible. It's going to be very difficult to execute. When you look at the more sophisticated, even the QSRs, when they went from 70% drive-through to 95, 100% drive-through, even they said, hey, we got to get X more transactions through the drive-through in order to make it under 2 minutes. So we're scrapping 30% of our products just to be able to execute that. So, what we're seeing is that, there is a new dynamic, and in order for restaurants to survive, there's a new channel that they can survive through, but in order to do it, they need to get a leaner menu. They have to revisit the pricing, which can mean startlingly different pricing. In some trade areas, they need to scrap all convention about modest price increases and really rethink, hey, what's the new pricing that actually supports survival of my business, right? It's not, traditional price elasticity that you need to be asking about. So anyway, that's a big mouthful. I don't want to run on about it, but these are some of the things that are really questions I've been asked about a lot over the past several months.
So Mike, I wonder about, I don't think it's unique to the restaurant business, but it's kind of an uneven playing field over the last several years between chains and independents, and chains have so much advantage with buying power and analytics, et cetera. But I wonder if that field is equalizing a little bit. If I were an operator today, I think I would much rather be either an independent or a small group versus one of these big, giant 500,000 unit concepts or more, because of agility and the ability to make changes. I have a client who's an independent operator up in Napa, and in many ways, this has been a great thing for him because it got him out of a bad lease with a landlord that wasn't relenting, but it got him out of that, and it enabled him to get into a truck and now do a ghost kitchen. And so now he has a brick and mortar, he has a truck, he has a ghost kitchen, and he's going to build something else here shortly that he thinks makes sense based on the new landscape. So I don't know, what are you seeing out there? What is you said that those independents weren't changing their menus. Are the big concepts changing their menus? What's the landscape between the two?
Yeah, really, Andrew, I disagree that the the dynamics have never been so much in favor of the big guys as opposed to the little guys, right? When you really look at, people talk about, people are most familiar with what's going on with the PPP loans, right? And, in the survey that we did, I think it was almost 80% of the independents had taken some PPP loan. So they did get some government assistance, but they also said that gave them about 90 days of survival time, right? So that's not a lot of runway. Whereas if you're a public company, right, or if you're funded by big private equity, the Fed has injected $3 trillion into the debt markets. So if you can get public funding, right, if you're one of the big guys, you've got endless amounts of debt that you can assume, which just gives you obscene amounts of capital to go and buy up everybody else's debt, expand your footprint, figure out which other restaurant concepts you want to buy and invest in. And the formula for success over the next couple of years is really technology, right? Technology and automation, right? Which is technology. You mentioned ghost kitchens, right? If you've already got an established brand, and we just mentioned how, there's a big problem with traditional trade areas, right? Where all of these restaurants have been built, where people used to be going every day. And if an actual permanent new normal is that more people are going to be working from home more often, and that means that more people need food closer to home, well, municipal zoning laws are going to take a long time to change. But can you build a ghost kitchen closer to a residence? Well, you can do that a lot faster. And it's going to be a hell of a lot easier for a large chain to be able to make that kind of investment. And when a large chain does that for multi-concept, they can also invest in robotics, right? So you've got a ghost kitchen investing in robotics and in operational efficiency and in all of the logistics to be able to deliver for, in their own logistics, not paying 30%, to some third party, right, off the top. All right. So these are all the success factors that we're going to be looking in when you've got that kind of wherewithal. You look at Rourke, right? Rourke is buying up everything. Yesterday it looks like they're going to buy up Dunkin' Donuts, right? Or Dunkin' brands. Yeah. So it's basically going to be an oligopoly, right? The whole restaurant industry is going to be owned by a few big players.
It's scary. That's scary. It takes the wind out of a lot of folks' sails. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Many of the folks I've talked to and worked with over the last several months have been, mid-sized chains, and their ability to pivot and react quickly has just been immediate. They immediately lowered immediately changed their menus and took it as an example. The opportunity to change menu so that they could become immediately more efficient. A lot of the things that everybody already wanted to do, they just started to do immediately. Lowering those menu thresholds, immediately addressing the price issue. It gave them the kind of the permission that they were looking for to make those changes. Many of the things that you mentioned, Mike, were current trends already, right? So Andrew dropped off. He just texted me. He's trying to get back on. So he's
Andy, what would you call mid-size?
I guess anything under 100 units. Say
Okay.
It's 20 to 60 units. I would call that.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you? I mean, the big
absolutely.
bar between restaurant chains that are below and above 100, that's where the numbers really skew, right? There's so few restaurant chains that get to 100 units, and then the number goes way up from there.
Yeah.
So that's what I guess I was referring to was, you mentioned a bunch of of location strategy and having the ability to pivot and change has certainly helped those, as well as the brand recognition for the ghost kitchens and the delivery aspects. If you've got a small brand and nobody knows who you are, it's very tough to build sales, through a ghost kitchen medium. I mean, you're basically 100%. You're trying to generate brand awareness becomes very difficult.
And I'll say this, even for the larger brands like we've been talking about, they've seen the negative impact of this extreme focus on digital sales and specifically delivery. I was just reading an article about Chipotle and how they're seeing record digital sales. And, of course, over half their sales are coming from an online platform of some sort. But they've also seen a drop in their profits because of paying third-party delivery partners to make those deliveries. So even the big guys are feeling sort of the crunch there, that as we move closer and closer to meeting our consumers where they are, sort of that last mile partner, that was the trend I think we were alluding to. It was the trend before the pandemic set in. How prepared are you, to take that sort of cut into your profits to accommodate this? Like, what are you doing to innovate around it in terms of managing either your own sort of delivery system and delivery drivers, and having worked for one of those mid-sized brands that you were mentioning, Andy, it was something that in my tenure we looked at considerably, like, all of the things that come along with having delivery drivers or bikers and things like that. And, as things like minimum wage rises, et cetera, what does that look like in the long run? And I think, it's something that the smaller mom and pop one-off brands really don't have the money to invest in, really researching and figuring out, or the manpower to do.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Anisha. I think, that, at 25-30% of the check, paying to, when it was 8, 10-12% of your sales, then you kind of go, okay, well, it's incremental. I have to keep the restaurant open anyway. So, I'll think of it as, an incremental sale, right? But when all of a sudden that is 80% of your sales because you can't open the inside, or worse, I've seen some restaurants who are using that for curbside because they can't figure out an electronic way of getting the food, outside their door. It's nuts, right? Because then that becomes 80-90% of your sales. Now all of a sudden the economics of doing business doesn't make sense anymore. Mm-hmm. So you've got to completely rethink the economics and the pricing of your business.
And hey, it puts a lot of pressure on all of the other decisions that you're making around your business, right? Like, we know that continuous improvement is something that takes businesses from good to great, so all the time thinking about how you can get better, a sharper operation, and save money and increase your margins and things like that. But if you're one of those brands that has found success in something, and you just believe that that's going to carry you through, and you don't continue to think of ways and find ways to embrace technology, like you mentioned, Mike, and embrace the data, were some of the things that I made notes of, and really work on SKU optimization at a granular level and menu optimization at a granular level. This period of time can potentially swallow you up, and we're seeing it pretty widespread throughout the nation.
I spent a good part of my career helping large and small brands figure out how to price their menus correctly. Mm-hmm. And I've been in many meetings where I'd say, look, you've got to proceed cautiously, in a measured way. Don't price more than X or Y. Price, change, measure, redo. things have changed so dramatically. The economics of running a restaurant have so completely changed that some of those rules just simply don't apply. You know, when the economics of your business, you know, all of a sudden jump because you're relying on a third-party vendor who's charging you 30% of the top line, and you're only making 5% at the bottom line, you cannot make money by increasing your prices by 3%.
Yeah.
You know, you have to take another look at the economics of your business as if you were starting over.
Yeah.
And you have to decide, you know, is my business viable with prices that are 25, 30% higher than they are today? You know, what's the competitive complexion, right, of where I am in my marketplace? Because the prices that I'm starting at now, you know, think about reopening, you know, tomorrow, right? And here are my new prices, and they just might be 25% higher than they were yesterday. Because, you know, if you increase your prices by 5%, you're just dying slower. You know, and that's just an unfortunate fact of where the economics are of being in the restaurant business at this moment.
Mike, have you seen any data, or is there any data being gathered about, or is it possible to look at how customers, how the consumer, how their sensibility and sensitivity to price change is being adjusted, or is responding to this very need for operators to really throw out the rule book on price changes to really help them level out some of the hits that they're taking?
Well, there's been, you know, to say it's been crazy times. I mean, it's been crazy on many levels, right? And you know, for a long time, you know, some economists were saying, "Oh, it's going to be a V-shaped recovery out of this," and then other people were saying this K-shaped recovery, and so forth. You know, when you look at how, you know, and this isn't, you know, this is a political commentary. You know, this is just about, you know, the facts of how the stimulus and how the, you know, how the money that's been injected in the economy has affected two different groups, right? At the very top level, you know, anybody who's, you know, involved in, you know, public markets and so on and so forth has had an enormous injection of capital, right? So there's some zombie companies who just, you know, they've got so much liquidity that they might have died in any other recession, but they're doing just fine, right? And, you know, so there's this wealth effect at the top that where people are doing just fine. And then there was this other, you know, the stimulus checks that went out. There was another group of people who got more money on unemployment than they would have gotten if they were working their jobs. And that had a stimulus effect by, you know, actually, you know, helping with pantry loading and all sorts of things. So when you go back to June and July, you know, you saw, you know, people who were getting those checks spending a lot more money because you saw that actually, you know, people's incomes actually spiked during that time because people had more money in their pocket, and that money went straight back into the economy. So to say, you know, are people more price sensitive or are they less? There's like this pseudo weird economy going on where it's hard to even measure, right? So I spent a lifetime measuring price elasticity, and I guess I'm saying it's sort of unmeasurable right now because there's all of these different oddities going on. Now, what I can say is that, you know, when people change how they buy things and is coming from different channels and so on and so forth, they tend to notice those things less. I know that a lot of the QSRs took much bigger price increases than they had in the past. And I didn't see the news flashes, you know, on CNN or, you know, or anything else. You know, you saw that, you know, grocery prices shot up more than they have in 5 years. So we're seeing that, you know, while inflation overall has not been up considerably, food cost inflation has been spiking over the past 8 months.
So it sounds like there's not, there's a lot of things that were in there. I think what she was asking was, what kind of guidance do you give, or what's out there to talk about how to address that. We had an interesting call a couple of weeks ago. We're talking about delivery in specific, and we had one operator on who's from Ottawa, Canada, and she has a small, sandwich shop, and she was new, new to the business, has one location, started out their location a little more than a year ago, basically started out with a delivery menu that was close to 30% higher than what she's. That's just, we just started out that way and got zero kickback. Now it's obviously a locational thing. There's all kinds of different things involved in elasticity in a different market, but how do you advise someone on that if it's an independent operator in a location? Hey, what should I be doing?
So every statistical econometric model that I've ever built in some way was either influenced or directly dependent on the competitive saturation within the trade area, right, that the stores were operating in. Right. And for, the past 30 years, that was pretty easy to measure because there was some stability in broad sweeps anyway of, okay, how many options do people have in a trade area? Right. And yeah, there were closures and so forth, but somebody would close and somebody else would reopen. And there was a certain growth rate that you could apply and so forth. Right. So you would kind of know, here's the population, here's the daytime population, here's how many fast food options people have, here's how many full service options they have. And based on that, you could have a pretty good idea as to, hey, do people have lots of options or do they have very few options? And are my prices very close to what the competitive options are, or are they very far from it, right? And I know that when you measure the actual price elasticity over time, it tends to be very closely related to some of those factors. What's completely blown up in the past 8 months is our understanding of how saturated those trade areas are, because all of the ways of understanding, okay, well, who's actually open now and who's closed, and what's happening with daytime population, what offices are occupied and which ones aren't. So all of these traditional ways of looking at it. So in a lot of ways, we're back to restaurant marketing 101, which, back when I was in my restaurant operations days, you would have to sit down with, paper and pen, and map out, okay, here's my restaurant, who are my direct competitors, what are the demand generators, for me, and what are the demand generators for my direct competitors? How am I priced compared to them? And you break it down by channel, right? And by meal period. Are we competing, on curbside delivery, right? Are we competing on dine in? What are the commodity products that we're selling, right? Because those are the things that people will notice. Chicken wings, pizza by the slice, spaghetti and meatballs, domestic beer, right? Some of the things that people will notice right off the bat. Some of the specialty items that sometimes you think you need to price lower are actually some of those things that are, that you probably have more flexibility to price higher because they might be, unique to your location, right? Unfortunately, half rack of ribs, you think that, you've got the best barbecue sauce in town, so therefore you can price it higher. It might not be the case because a half rack of ribs might be more of a commodity item that, that you can get, in a lot of different places.
So it sounds, I mean, that's that's not an easy thing to do, right? But it sounds like what you're saying is if you're in a small market, you need to do the best you can to kind of create your own old school strategy. What's going on right now? Do a survey of kind of who who you up against, when, and how, and then try to adopt a strategy based on that. You can't.
Yeah,
I would
go
throw
ahead,
one more thing. How well do you know your customer, right? because I think brands that are smart work really hard to know as much as possible about their core customer base so that they can make decisions with them in mind. And if you don't use the data that you're afforded to use, that's at your disposal, to really do that, I think it's hard really to um, to soundly make some of those decisions that will affect them and get it right.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you know, it's also when you think about the big brands, right? Right along those lines, the big restaurant brands were founded in the TV age, right? They were all, you know, they were all driven by people eyeballs on television sets, right? And big ad campaigns that were all driven by, you know, top-down management, right? Here's the message, here's what we stand for, and here's how you're going to do things. So, you know, that's in their DNA. So before this, you know, COVID struck, you know, there was a new resurgence in independent restaurants because they were able to know their customer a lot better. And the big change were, you know, trying to figure out, oh, well, how do I get to know my customer through, you know, invasive technologies that will, you know, customize the experience by, you know, crawling the interwebs to find out, you know, creepy things about them, right? But, you know, in smaller restaurants, right, restaurant business is local, right? And the more you can tailor it to local, the better. But what the independents and what the smaller restaurants need to do locally is, you know, make sure that they've got their pricing right, and not just right for the customer, right, to make sure that they're going to make money on the ground, right? Does it make sense, the economics for my business locally? But they also need to make sure that they're ready for curbside, which means find the best stuff that you've got that's going to make you money, that you can bring outside your doors, right, in a nice way, you know, to package it so that you can produce it quickly, right, profitably, and bring it outside the doors so that you can sell it, you know, en masse, and then advertise that on social media, because that's where people's eyes are right now, right? They're on their computers in their homes, right? And, you know, in the same study that I was talking about, less than 30% of the people that we were surveyed, the independent restaurants, were doing the social media advertising strategy, right? And that's some of the cheapest, you know, some of the least expensive targeting you can do, especially if you're doing, you know, micro targeting around your restaurant. Yeah, very inexpensive stuff. You know, say, hey, here are the top 5 things that you can order from our restaurant. You can do it now. Here's the link. You know, it's getting to your local community rapidly.
Yeah. And there are a lot of things that support that, right? Like there are a lot of things that if you look at that on a more granular level and some of the work that Andrew and I do, it's about really helping all size brands align with some of just those small everyday things to help them can drive business to curbside and these other ways that they're able to generate business these days. And some of the notes that I wrote down, you know, leading up to this morning was, you know, don't make it hard for people to spend their money, right? So if you are doing all the things that Mike said that you should be doing and you want to see the positive results of that, you have to make it as easy as some of those big brands do for folks to get in touch with you, order the things that they want to order, and receive it in the way that they expect or better. And so what I think I'm seeing that I'm paying a lot of attention to and have been over the last several months is some of these small brands that were doing really well, you know, even locally here in my community pre-COVID. What was their response time to figure out how they can adapt all those great things that they were doing to this new sort of world that we live in terms of online ordering platforms and apps and things like that? If you didn't have it in place, are you putting it in place? If it wasn't sharp and didn't work properly, there were a lot of bugs and a lot of complaints about it on, you know, on pages where folks can leave comments. are you addressing that? Are you using the right tools for the job? Is your packaging good? So like Mike mentioned, really paring down your menu to adapt to a more on the go and the world that we live in of delivery and pickup and not eating in the restaurant, of course, right now. Is your menu suitable for that? Okay, so now you pare down your menu. What are you going to put it in? There are still some folks who aren't paying attention to packaging in a real way. And it's making it hard for, again, customers to spend their money there, or at least justify it in the long run.
Yeah, I love what you
that's
said
great.
I love what you said about making everything easy to do business with.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the name of the game in everything, right? It's convenience, right? And the
Mhm.
trend in our industry has been convenience and making, be easy to do business with it every possible way. So what Mike started off with was, and you just added to was menu. Decide on a menu that actually works outside of your business. It doesn't matter where you are. A good example for me locally, there's a James Beard nominated restaurant. That's kind of a fancy restaurant that had a great business before. As soon as the pandemic hit, they switched to doing barbecue and pizza. And they do those really, really well. Now that's 180 degrees from what they were doing before, but now they have a viable viable business doing that. They had a pizza oven in their place already. They weren't making pizza in it before, but now they are, and it's fantastic. So it's the best pizza in town. And then their barbecue, of course, barbecue travels really well. So
reheat really well.
That's it, right? And you can package it, and it's family oriented and all that. So deciding on a menu that works for you, packaging it well. Pricing it in a way that makes sense, as Mike pointed out, you can't lose money, or that's a losing proposition. Extending your life a little bit longer makes zero sense. Marketing it social media locally, again, to your point, Mike, about everybody being at home now, obviously, if you can put your best feet forward locally, both marketing wise. And the other thing about being visually a bit able to do business with people that I think a lot of restaurant companies don't really get is, viewing their restaurant from a passersby perspective. Working with a large chain right now, we've talked about this 100 times. They actually have drive-throughs on their giant buildings, but a lot of their guests don't know that they have it. I said, well, we should be putting a person outside every day at lunch and at peak periods. How much does it cost to do that? Even if it's not that productive necessarily to have a person out there, having a tent out there, having a person there, when a customer's driving by, they can see that you're making an effort to be easy to do business with. And that's so much more conducive to saying, they've got their shit together. I'm going to give them a shot. Maybe I'm not hungry right now, but you're going to be on their radar tomorrow. A really smart local operator I saw set up an amazing drive-through outside of their. They were in a place where there, of course, there was no traffic now in their street, but there's a bunch of parking places right in front of their business. So that they set up several tents. So it was a big presentation, and they're doing like a drive-through through it, and it was fucking amazing. Like, okay, they literally would be not there right now had they not done that. I think their ability to view it as from a customer's perspective of, geez, I have to be easy to do business with. From mobile payment that's now available. Obviously, that pretty much everybody's offering that now. I'm sure it's probably pretty hard to get your hands on a handheld unit right now.
Along those lines. Andy, I think one of the things that I've seen with the digital menus is that a lot of what people are offering are these you got the QR code, and then you go and do the QR code, and it's this PDF menu.
Yeah.
So you can look at it on your device, but then it's not attached to any ordering mechanism, right? Yeah. So it's just this clunky experience that you can sort of read it, but then it dead ends from there, right? Or it's on the window outside to give you a curbside, so you read it, but then you can't order, and it tells you to call the restaurant. Which so you can see that there are restaurants that are trying to figure out what the solution, might be, but they haven't necessarily found what the total solution is yet that makes it convenient and easy. I think, as Anisha said, make it easy for the customer to pay you, right? To buy from you.
Yeah,
and a lot of these solutions are so clunky, it doesn't make it easy for the customer to give you their money, right? And say, hey, let me order from you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even a lot of the apps, are not easy to navigate, right? To say, hey, what do I want to order? I'm working with a kiosk company called Byte Kiosk that's in the process of taking the kiosk out of the kiosk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty interesting because they understand that what they did on the kiosk is they had facial recognition so that it would see, it would recognize if you had been in before, but it wasn't creepy. So it wasn't saying, hi, Andy, welcome back. It just said, okay, I've seen you before. This is what you ordered last time. Would you like to order it again? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that would just make the experience easier, so it would just pop up and you say, yeah, I want that. So I've helped them create a recommendation engine behind it so that each step of the way through the ordering process, it helps to make suggestions and so forth through the order. And now they're taking it out of the kiosk and putting it through other ordering mechanisms. Because the whole digital experience through all of these different channels, the way that we used to design menus, like that whole way of making it easier for the consumer and so forth, it hasn't traveled right to these digital devices, right, and other ways of ordering. But these new digital ways of ordering are going to be with us for a long time. So these disciplines of making it easier for the customer to make a choice, right, and to make it more profitable for the restaurant by queuing up suggestions and that kind of thing. There's a whole new universe of what we can do with digital menus from the restaurant standpoint and the consumer standpoint that I think is going to be pretty exciting, because there's a new mass of data and analytical technique can be applied to it.
Mike, who's doing a good job? If you were a small or mid-sized company, who would you suggest folks be talking to? Are there any standouts that are really doing a good job with the digital with linking those technologies?
I think that there are a lot of companies that are in development with them right now. This company that I mentioned, Byte Kiosk, they're not complete. They're not finished with the development yet. I mean, they've got the kiosk, but they don't have the pre-order yet. But they should be out with it in the next couple of months. I think One Dime, I think they've got a pretty interesting curbside ordering option. But in terms of like the total package, you don't see any fully commercialized options right now, which is why you see the big companies, especially the big QSRs, really creating their own, because nobody's really made the full deal, right? Because none of them. Yes, you can get something that allows you to do curbside ordering, right, or delivery ordering. If you go through a third party, then you're paying just an enormous amount to have their technology. But it doesn't give you a lot of control over how you market and merchandise and control the experience for the customer. That doesn't exist yet, and I'm working with a few companies now to try and bring that to life for the next generation of menus, I think.
And Mike, I would imagine it's difficult to ultimately customize some of those off-the-shelf options and tailor it to your exact brand, rather than go the route that you're mentioning, which is to sort of create your own platform and do it in-house. At least I've seen that in the past, and I'd imagine it's at least partly true still.
Yeah, I think that's why the big brands are all, there's some amazing technology out there, you know, but they all do a piece of it. So
Yeah.
you've got to you end up working with 8 different vendors who all want, you know, X dollars per month, right?
Yeah.
And then you got to, you know, sort of jerry rig it all together to make it work.
And they
There's
want
not
that.
a single solution right now, which is why the big brands are trying to create their own.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's tough. It's tough, especially, you know, so I think as Andy was saying, you know, if you're a mid-sized brand, you've got a better shot at cobbling together a few different solutions to make one. If you're an enormous brand, you can make your own from scratch. If you're an independent, there's not a lot of options for you.
Yeah. And you might not have the money to really do that, right? Because all those stringing together costs a lot at each step potentially.
Right.
So those smaller brands, those mom and pops that, you know, one unit doing good in their own right, but it makes it incredibly difficult, and they're, I think, at an extreme disadvantage there when you talk about trying to put together a complete package that'll meet all of their needs versus some of those mid-size brands or some of the larger brands are able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hopeful that, you know, that in the next few months, there's going to be some better solutions coming out on the market. Because there's a profound need for it right now.
Yeah.
Like bolt-on options with, you know, with POS providers. Are there any of the POS providers that are doing, you know, a good job of at least providing some minimal stuff, like being able to help people with setting up online ordering systems that actually work? And you know, is any of that there?
Well, I think for basic online ordering, you know, you've got Olo, you know, now, you know, Olo, I think, has gone more into the enterprise level, right? So that's still tough to, you know, I don't know how, you know, how well Olo is now working with, you know, the mom and pops and the small chains anymore. But you've got One Dine too. You know, I think that's an option for any size. You know, I think, you know, Byte's going to have something. They've already got one for, you know, for outside. It's not a pre-order, but they've got what they call a flash product, where you can come up to a restaurant, click on the QR on the door, and then do the order that will go through to the restaurant. And they integrate with about half a dozen POS systems. And then, you know, the POS companies, they have their own, but it's never as good as what the other, you know, it's never as good as what the other vendors are offering.
No.
So.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate, because it's such a, you know, the kind of that basic need that you just described, that's the very minimum that you need. You know, you obviously, if your menu, if you've got some good products that'll work outside, you've kind of figured out packaging needs, you've got at least some pricing that works, you need the ability to have somebody easily do business with you and pay you, you know, and if you can't do that, that makes it very difficult. So having at least somebody that can help with that's a huge help. You talked a little bit about location strategy. I want to revisit that for just a minute, because we've only got a few more minutes. I want to keep you on for all day, but I think that's an interesting conversation, because, as you said, there's so many, the shift toward, you know, being home has opened up a lot of opportunities for folks to look at location strategy that's very different. And while we don't have data, and it'll be a long time to garner that, we know people are home. We know that those businesses that are located around residential areas are viable. So right now, to take advantage of that, let's say you had a location that was that's now struggling to shift and look for something that's could be a closed, you know, something, some secondary real estate that's available near a residential neighborhood, and set it up right from the start with a real strong delivery program right out of the gate. It's got a high level of opportunity anyway for someone to look at doing something right now. So it seems to me. So, Awesome. Well, I guess Andrew, we couldn't get it back. Hopefully, the fire that was near his house didn't cause that. He was texting me saying he couldn't get back on. So, he lives in LA where he's often has difficulty with all kinds of things that I rib him about. In closing, we don't want to keep everybody on for too long, but thanks for coming on today, Mike. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you again, and glad that you're doing well in the great north.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
And Nisha, awesome to see you as well. And we will ask you both to come back and these topics get kind of big, and we always try to figure out how to pare it down to a couple of points that can, help folks. And the conversation always seems to get fairly high level. So I'm always trying to figure out how do we disseminate information that can, maybe help folks that need support right now. But I think we covered a few things that would do that. So I appreciate everybody's time today, and thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.